Something terrible has just happened in the Kremlin. A real power struggle has erupted in Moscow. Lavrov is on his way out. An ambitious negotiator has become a ticking time bomb for the minister. The bunker leader's throne is shaking. This has shaken all of Russia. A deadly decision for the Russians. Denmark is entering the war in full force. An incredible decision for Ukraine. Military factories are being built one after another. A new foothold for Flamingo. Shock. The Ukrainian armed forces are burning things up near Lyman. The Russians' grand victories have turned to ashes. Reality hits like a hammer. Russian units are burning in the fire of a brilliant Ukrainian trap. Trump sent negotiators with secret instructions. What secret signals did the Russian authorities receive? Machines of death? Russian airplanes are now a lottery. Flights are being urgently cancelled. Civilian planes are simply falling apart in mid-air. All this and more in our upcoming report. Hotspot. An exclusive that surprised everyone. Dmitriev versus Lavrov. A war for power in the Kremlin. A real carve-up of power. A fight for attention from the fucking top, Putin. A shocking truth has surfaced about what is happening in Moscow's high offices. All the sensational details. Coming up.
The one who is causing problems for the Kremlin's old guard.
On President Putin's orders, I spent 2 days in the United States. I was received positively, and we had a very candid conversation.
The head of the Russian direct investment fund, Kirill Dmitriev, has long been dubbed Putin's negotiator with the US. He is also called one of the architects of those very 28 points of Trump's peace plan. After Trump's new term, Dmitriev's importance to the Kremlin increased sharply, and now he has become one of the key participants in Russian-American contacts and negotiations on resolving the war in Ukraine.
In fact, there is quite a substantial list of things, specifically a comprehensive list of steps that need to genuinely happen in order for us to truly and effectively start interacting more effectively and harmoniously.
As of today, Dmitriev is effectively serving as one of the Kremlin's key diplomatic channels. For Putin, he has become a very close person. It has repeatedly come up that Dmitriev became close to the dictator thanks to family ties with the head of the Kremlin. After all, Dmitriev's wife is a close friend of Putin's daughter, Ekaterina Tikhonova, but it's not just about nepotism.
He is someone who is close to Putin due to certain family connections, some kind of family ties, because we remember those stories about wives and daughters and how exactly he ended up in this circle at all. On the other hand, it's important to understand that he studied abroad and he had established quite close relationships with representatives of the American, primarily economic elite.
Good contacts with Steve Witkoff also played into his hands. And now it would seem a man who was advantageous for the Kremlin has become a thorn in the side of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, specifically for Sergei Lavrov. After all, recently a real battle has begun for the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Lavrov is a champion of traditional diplomacy.
We are, in principle, polite people and try to maintain these qualities of ours.
Dmitriev represents new approaches that include not only diplomatic but also business relations. The media has repeatedly reported on Putin's dissatisfaction with the previously failed negotiations with the Americans. Lavrov was blamed for this. After that, Lavrov virtually disappeared from the public eye. But it was Dmitriev who put US-Russia relations on a new track.
So this gentleman, Kirill Dmitriev, he helped organize everything, helped essentially to establish some kind of relationship between our countries. Then one more thing, he's from Ukraine. That is, in Putin's view, he's the right kind of Russian who denies the existence of Ukraine as an independent country. And accordingly, for Putin, this is also probably an important moment.
Competition has increased, and as Russian media write, Dmitriev decided to advance his career. Further, he even offered Putin his resignation. Lavrova. According to Kirill Dmitriev, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is already outdated and ineffective. Traditional diplomacy is archaic. That's why it's time for one of Russia's key diplomats to retire.
This is about the future, because he was talking a bit more about the past.
Lavrov's team is aware of this. That's why they're preparing to put compromising material on Dmitriev on Putin's desk.
Dmitriev goes to America and tells all sorts of things there. It's very unfortunate that he's doing this. We've gathered some information on him. We'll soon pass it on to Vladimir Vladimirovich. After that, Dmitriev should come under investigation. At the very least, he should no longer be allowed to leave Russia. I'm saying this directly so that Dmitriev doesn't get any bolder. Diplomacy is inappropriate in his case, said a source close to Lavrov.
The competition has turned into a conflict, and this conflict between Lavrov and Dmitriev has been going on for almost a year now. According to journalists, the new negotiator has also raised questions from Patrushev. He stated that Dmitriev is overstepping his bounds when he makes promises about cooperation between Moscow and Washington, especially in the Arctic region.
Nikolai Platonovich had a conversation with the president. He noted that Dmitriev is, of course, a talented negotiator, but he has clearly overstepped his authority.
The relationship between the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry and Putin's special envoy has reached a breaking point. But, according to experts, Dmitriev is not interested in Lavrov's position.
I don't think Dmitriev is aiming for the role of foreign minister at all. He has a somewhat different function. And it's important to understand that in the power structure Putin has built, formal positions certainly play a certain role, but it's the informal connections that are the main key factor. In terms of informal connections, Dmitriev has probably already even surpassed Lavrov now.
In some ways, he's overtaken him.
And according to experts, it's unlikely that anyone will remove Lavrov. Besides, Putin values people who have worked with him for years. But would anyone actually dare to remove Putin himself? Russian journalists, citing their own sources, have shared a very interesting detail. Dmitriev is very ambitious and not entirely honest with Putin.
Sergei Viktorovich believes that Dmitriev is not completely honest with the president and is playing his own game with the Americans, hoping for a higher position in the future, the source said. He did not specify whether this referred to the post of prime minister, foreign minister, or even president.
The latest negotiations in Moscow have shown just how influential Kirill Dmitriev is right now in the negotiation process with the Americans. And this is a very important part of the history of Russian diplomacy. But will Dmitriev's ambitions be enough to get him there? To the post of president. The question remains open, since for now he is still in a standoff with Sergei Lavrov, whom Dmitriev has clearly sidelined with his...
We're about to explore some truly groundbreaking and innovative concepts, presenting new ideas. All the truly astonishing and unprecedented details are coming up next, so stay tuned as we delve into them. This pivotal and far-reaching decision represents a move that fundamentally reshapes the strategic landscape and operational framework of European defense capabilities, thereby changing the entire architecture of European defense. For the first time in NATO history, a member country of the alliance is officially allowing Ukraine to set up defense production on its territory.
The Danish government announced the project on September 3, 2025, calling it a helping hand for Ukraine in its ongoing struggle to preserve its sovereignty and security, against the backdrop of the ongoing conflict with Russia. In
the small Danish town of Vojens in southern Jutland, next to the Skridstrup air base where F-16S are on active duty, the first piles for the Ukrainian factory are being driven into the ground. This is much more than just the construction of another industrial facility. This is the architecture of future European security.
The best help we can give Ukraine right now is to support the Ukrainian defense industry. Ukraine must become even more self-sufficient, and by welcoming the first Ukrainian company in Denmark, we are taking another step in our support. This way, production will not be halted by Russian attacks, and at the same time, cooperation between Ukrainian and Danish companies will be strengthened.
The project is being implemented by the Ukrainian company 5-Point, known for developing the Flamingo missile, one of the most successful Ukrainian innovations in recent years. But in Denmark, it is not the missiles themselves that will be produced, but their core, the solid rocket fuel. A critically important component required by every long-range system, every interceptor, every complex. Today, it is being used against Russian military targets.
Denmark stands shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. Their fight for freedom is our fight for freedom. Putin shows every day that he will not stop. That is why we must help the Ukrainians stop him. We are doing this by allowing 5-Point to establish itself in Denmark. At the same time, we are creating new, closer ties between the Danish and Ukrainian defense sectors, as well as our enterprises. This contributes to our security and creates more opportunities for Danish companies to support the defense of Europe and Ukraine's fight for freedom.
The location next to the airbase was not chosen by chance. This means ready-made infrastructure, enhanced security, and the possibility of integration into NATO's common logistics routes. And Denmark is allocating 500 million kroner for this.
We are increasing the security of our own production. We understand that any production on the territory of Ukraine could be targeted by Russian missiles and simply be destroyed.
Construction is scheduled to be completed in 2026. And when the plant starts operating, Europe will gain a new element of its security. Ukrainian in content and European in protection. This means that, for the first time in years of war, a model will emerge in which defense support for Ukraine becomes not just a response but a long-term system.
The Danes fully understand the entire complex and multifaceted geopolitical problem of Russian shelling, the Russian invasion. They, like no one else, like the Scandinavian countries, understand this perfectly. That's precisely why they are the very first to proactively meet us halfway, demonstrating their commitment. They are actively moving towards establishing joint ventures, initiating and opening production facilities on their own sovereign territory to significantly help Ukraine further in the crucial creation of missiles. The creation of solid rocket fuel is the first stage. I think the next stage will be the deployment on Danish territory and the production of Ukrainian missiles.
Recently, Denmark has allocated its 28th military aid package amounting to 1.4 billion kroner. 100 million kroner are being directed to finance weapons production in Ukraine under the so-called Danish model. This is a mechanism that Copenhagen came up with on its own and which is now becoming an example for other allies. This is when a partner country not only purchases weapons but also helps develop production where it is truly needed. In Ukraine, under Ukrainian control for the Ukrainian army. Another 370 million are being allocated for the purchase of American weapons for Ukraine through the PURL initiative. This is a mechanism that Denmark, Sweden and Norway first launched back in 2025. By supplying missiles for the Patriot systems, this is a direct strengthening of Ukrainian air defense in the coming months. A separate portion of 80 million kroner will go toward fuel, which will be purchased through the NATO Support and Procurement Agency. It may seem like a small detail, but it's precisely such details that keep the army moving.
At this very moment, while the Kremlin boasts of grand victories, reality is hitting the Russians like a hammer. As soon as they brag about another success, their victorious units are immediately turned into a fiery wasteland by our forces. That's exactly what happened near Lyman just the other day. What really happened there? What surprises await the occupiers? What's next? Watch and see.
Don't say hop until you've jumped over. A Ukrainian proverb perfectly describes the current situation for the Russian forces in the Lyman direction. The occupiers managed to advance a little here, which was immediately reported by the ZID military correspondents. But obviously their reports are also read by Ukrainian intelligence. Thanks to this, the Ukrainian armed forces received operational data which they immediately put to use.
I want to thank the Russian war correspondent, Timofey Ermakov. He spoke about our positions on his Telegram channel. Thanks to this, the Ukrainians found us and took the Flanders. They killed.
Moreover, the heaviest battles on the front traditionally take place in the Pokrovsk area. A senior NATO official stated that Russians control 95% of the city. In Ukraine, however, they explained that in the west, gray zones are often attributed to the occupiers without fully understanding the specifics of the fighting. Therefore, in reality, the situation is better, although still very difficult. Yes.
Today, the Russians control most of Pokrovsk. Today, most of the city is occupied by the so-called gray zone. Yes, today the Russians are trying to disrupt our logistics as much as possible, including those of the Mirnovrad garrison, since this is a single Pokrovsk-Mirnovrad agglomeration. However, in any case, even today, despite all the efforts of the Russians, the defensive operation in Pokrovsk continues.
At the same time, for several weeks now, Putin has been blindly repeating that Pokrovsk is completely under Russian control. According to Sky News, Russia deliberately announced the capture of Pokrovsk ahead of negotiations with the US, which took place on December 2nd. However, in reality, the situation is quite different. Moreover, the Vostok troop grouping reported that the defense forces are organizing additional logistical routes to supply their units. In Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad, where intense fighting continues. And in the city itself, the Ukrainian armed forces continue to eliminate Russian occupiers.
An urban area is a densely populated region characterized by extensive infrastructure, commercial activity, and a large number of residents, such as cities and towns where human activities are concentrated and diverse. These areas typically feature a high concentration of buildings, roads, and public services, supporting a complex social and economic environment.
Another settlement that remains in the headlines is Kupiansk. Despite daily attempts by the Russians to turn the situation around here, they have not succeeded. The initiative remains with the Ukrainian armed forces, and the clearing of enemy units is already taking place on the outskirts of the city. At the
moment, about 50 to 60% of the city is completely under the control of the defense forces, and about another 20% is a gray zone. As always, the Special Operations Forces units performed excellently. They played a crucial role at the most critical moment.
Moreover, Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky stated that the Ukrainian armed forces are not only destroying the enemy, but also cutting off the occupiers' logistical routes. Specifically, those routes the enemy is trying to use to send in reserve forces.
There are no successes. The clearing operation is underway, and now, in fact, those very routes through which the enemy had established infiltration into Kupiansk have been blocked. This is actually what matches reality, because if it were otherwise, we would have seen changes on the map in Kupiansk. But there are no changes there.
Recently, alarming news has been coming from the Zaporizhzhia region. Our command acknowledges that the enemy has had some success there. However, the General Staff is making every effort to stabilize the situation. And according to analysts, the pace of the enemy's advance has already been significantly reduced.
Huliapol, which the enemy was counting on entering, right here and now continues to hold. Some Russian units that previously tried to infiltrate this settlement were destroyed. And in principle, in the near future, I think we will see that very stabilization of the front in this sector.
In total, over the past day, the enemy has tried more than 200 times to storm the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. In these attacks, more than 1,200 occupiers were eliminated, as well as nearly 50 vehicles and more than a dozen artillery systems destroyed.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
The Moscow scandal. Witkov and Kushner have shaken up the diplomatic scene. After leaving the Kremlin, they flew to Washington at lightning speed, carrying out secret assignments. What are the U.S.'s abrupt moves hiding, and what secret signals have the Russian authorities received? Details that will shock you.
Negotiations regarding the peace plan between Putin, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkov and Jared Kushner lasted almost 5 hours. This was the first time that an exchange of views between the American and Russian sides on the U.S. peace plan took place in this format in Moscow. And according to the Kremlin, there are positive developments.
No, it will not be the right one. The fact is, such a direct exchange of views took place for the first time yesterday. And again, as was said yesterday, some things were accepted, some were deemed unacceptable. This is a normal working process, a search for compromise.
Putin is not rejecting the so-called Trump peace plan, but he is not agreeing to it either. Putin's special representative Dmitriev described the talks with Witkov and Kushner as productive. Witkov has already flown to Moscow for the 6th time this year, and apart from wasted time, there has been no global result. Russia is not ready to make any concessions and stands its ground. So,
that is, Russia said, yes, we are ready to accept a lot of points, except for those that are fundamental for Ukraine. We actually know it's the same points over and over again. What is fundamental for Russia and for Ukraine, only in completely opposite directions. It is most likely impossible to work according to this plan, because for Ukraine, these are also red lines. And everything else might suit both sides, but still they can't come to an agreement.
At the same time as the meeting between Witkov and Putin, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio gave an interview on Fox News. He said that right now Ukraine and Russia are fighting over a territory the size of 20% of the Donetsk region, which is under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. And if these military actions are stopped and security is ensured, then in the near future, Ukraine can look forward to promising prospects.
Theoretically, if everything is done right, in 10 years, Ukraine's GDP could surpass Russia's GDP. That's what's needed. Stop the war, make sure that they are never invaded or attacked again. To protect Ukraine's long-term sovereignty and independence so that it does not become a puppet state. They are truly independent and sovereign. And this allows their economy not just to recover, but to thrive, turning it into a story of prosperity.
It sounds nice in words, but at the moment, no one is giving Ukraine such guarantees, and the pressure on Russia is not increasing. That is why only a strong Ukrainian army and successes on the battlefield matter. At the moment, these are the only factors ensuring further success in the negotiation process with Russia, and for this, Ukraine needs as much military support as possible. By the end of the year, Ukraine will receive $5 billion worth of weapons under the Pearl program. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said that the same level of support is expected next year. He expects that in 2026, Ukraine's partners will allocate $1 billion per month for arms purchases.
We currently have 4 billion, so that means we are really on track for 1 billion a month. August, September, October, November. Next year we will need a lot of money again. For the whole year, at least 1 billion. Maybe even a little more than 1 billion per month. Maybe?
Lithuanian Foreign Minister Kęstutis Budrys is convinced that the US efforts for a peace agreement will not succeed. Russia is simply trying to convince the international community that violating fundamental international principles is normal.
If we recognize Russia's territorial gains, it instantly destroys international law. The consequence will be new attacks and even more threats, both for Russia's neighbors and everywhere else.
The offensive continues. They are biting off pieces of Ukrainian territory. Russia's economic problems are not yet that critical. And as long as there are truly no grounds in the Kremlin for seeking peace, well, in fact, peace simply will not come.
Right now, the negotiations will be put on pause. And at this moment, it is very important that Russia does not achieve military successes at the front, but rather the opposite, in order to strengthen Ukraine's negotiating position.
Russian planes are on the verge of disaster. Over the past year, the number of accidents and emergency landings has quadrupled. Flights are being cancelled urgently. When will Russian planes turn into real death traps? All the horrifying details? Coming up next.
They've flown themselves into trouble. Russian civil aviation is visibly deteriorating.
I can hardly add anything here.
From January to the end of November 2025, the number of incidents involving Russian airline planes increased by about 4 times compared to the same period in 2024.
I've always consistently said, Vitaly Gennadiyevich, you can certainly back me up on this, that we absolutely need to pay much more significant attention to actively purchasing domestic equipment. If we had diligently done this in all the previous years, perhaps many things would undoubtedly be considerably easier now.
During this time, over 800 cases of malfunctions were recorded in the country, which led to flight cancellations or emergency interruptions. Whereas during the same period in 2024, there were no more than 200 such incidents.
Will we be able to fly, and on what?
We will, of course we will.
But what will we fly on, and how dangerous is it? This year, Russian commercial aviation has had 2 accidents and 2 air disasters in which a total of 53 people died. According to the Moscow Times, the largest of these was the crash of an Angara Airlines and 24 at the end of July. The aircraft was manufactured in 1976.
This is primarily due to the deterioration of the technical condition of the Russian aviation fleet and Russian civil aircraft. Nevertheless, we see that over the course of last year and at the beginning of this year, Russian civil aviation and the civil aviation authorities, numerous times they have appealed to ICAO, asking to lift sanctions from Russia in order to allow access to Western components and spare parts for aircraft. Boeing and Airbus, which actually account for 80 to 90% of all air transportation in Russia. In
early October, the head of Rosaviatia stated that according to the less optimistic forecast, in the next 5 years, Russia may lose 339 aircraft, including 109 foreign-made ones. According to the agency, the Russian airline fleet currently consists of just over 1,000 civil aircraft.
Overall, we're talking about an average of 50 to 60 aircraft being effectively taken out of operation each year over the next 5 years. First of all. Secondly, we're actually talking about more than half of the Western fleet that Russia is currently operating. According to various estimates, there may currently be about 500 to 600 Western airliners in the Russian Federation's fleet, about a third of which can no longer be used in regular service, as frequent breakdowns or a lack of spare parts for repairs mean that these planes are effectively grounded or have become victims of so-called aviation cannibalism.
After the war began, the Russian authorities decided to save the aviation industry and announced a program to revive the domestic aircraft industry. It was planned that the production of civil aircraft in the country would reach Soviet Union levels in just a few years, and that by 2030, companies would receive more than 1,000 domestically produced planes. But all of this turned out to be just words. At the beginning of 2025, the government decided to cut the aircraft production plan by 1.5 times.
We see that the level and technologies that are necessary for the production of these planes and aircraft are critically dependent on Russia's ability to purchase Western components, Western parts, Western technologies, and also the relevant manufacturing equipment needed to produce certain components or systems.
In other words, if we look to the future, Russians won't be able to fly for much longer.
we see the beginning. Russia continues to use the so-called parallel import mechanism, which essentially allows for the re-export of components and spare parts. First of all, secondly, this concerning situation inevitably leads to commercial and private planes being fitted with spare parts of often questionable and unclear origin, including critical components and parts that have already been previously used before. This leads to a decrease in flight safety. With the continued increase in aviation equipment failures as a result, we will see a rise in the number of air crashes, including casualties associated with them.
The lifting of Western sanctions could save Russian civil aviation, but for now, such a scenario is impossible. And new airplanes mean long-term orders, contracts for decades and billions of dollars, which Putin's Russia critically lacks because of the war.
Urgent. Macron in Beijing. France is putting the Celestial Empire before a choice. Macron is trying to get China to put pressure on Putin and stop the war. Will China be able to challenge the Kremlin? All the sensational details in the report.
Macron will ask China to put pressure on Putin. This Wednesday, the president of France plans to visit Beijing. And during his trip, he wants to once again ask Xi Jinping to influence Russia to end the war in Ukraine. This was stated by the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jean-Noël Barrot. Macron's current visit to China will be his fourth since coming to power in France.
Russia's economy is far too dependent on cooperation with China. The crude oil exported by these extensive pipelines primarily goes to various European nations, but a significant portion also reaches China. And it is well known that China consistently purchases truly huge volumes of this essential oil, indeed significantly more than what the European continent can realistically purchase, according to reliable estimates and current market analyses. In the first quarter of this year, it was as high as 51.7%.
The visit of the Chinese foreign minister to Moscow for talks with his Russian counterpart hardly seems coincidental. Interfax claims that the two sides are holding consultations on issues of strategic security and military cooperation. Moreover, this is happening on the very same day that U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is meeting with the Kremlin dictator Vladimir Putin.
China, of course, has its own interests. As for
called for it in a conversation with U.S. President Donald Trump. Was this sincere? That's the question. It's rhetorical, however, it's not far from the truth that benefits China.
China does not want any real success on the peace track. Accordingly, the capitulation of Ukraine is unacceptable to Ukraine, but in essence, it would put an end to this war, a bad end for Ukraine. China is not satisfied with that outcome either.
China creates the appearance of supporting Russia while actually nurturing the idea of how it might absorb it.
China understands that Russia's economic problems will lead to difficulties in providing for the country's regions. With finances, first and foremost, this will affect the regions far from Moscow. The regions far from Moscow are those that are very close to China. Moreover, some of them were once part of China even before Open Up Void. That's why China understands that this problem with financing and the disintegration of Russia is, in essence, the collapse of the Soviet Union 2.0, only this time it's happening to Russia. This will lead to China expanding its territory, simply because places like Tuva and other regions will remember that they were once part of China and will simply want to be under China's umbrella, so to speak, to continue their normal economic activities or to be more oriented toward Beijing than toward Moscow.
In addition to the territorial gains from Russia's elimination, for China it's also a matter of dividing up political influence in the world. It was the invasion of Ukraine that dealt a painful blow to Moscow in this regard, and with each passing year of the war,
it only continues to decline, steadily and persistently, leading to a worsening situation that impacts various aspects and shows no signs of improvement.